Fiasco and Talib Kweli After All, and we'll be right back.
Heavy as heaven, I am Atlas at this, manage to balance massive masses, pull my back without. She don't wanna sob at his wake, but he wanna follow in his steps. Bang his hat, learn his shakes, master his swagger in the bathroom mirror, cop a Chevy, steady mob in his place. Yeah, it's just the problems we face. Look, his mom's in her face and promise. Sun gon' shine after all. Sun gon' shine. I need you all to be clear on exactly what I'm saying. For your attention to span to understand that I ain't playing. You mistaken if you somehow think it's just me you facing. Staring me down while your enemy is standing adjacent. My heart is racing, but I know just what I stand for. We chasing death carelessly like Jessica, I care more. Who said, just because no one can understand how you speak, don't necessarily mean that what you be saying is deep. In case you die in your sleep, you ask the Lord for a blessing. Sometimes it sneak up so quiet that the silence is deafening. You never know who the assassin is until it's your time to go. Your life is flashing, asking for forgiveness, but you move too slow. Now the people that you love bear the pain that you once harbored. You was living for yourself, so you could never be a martyr. Life is hard, death is harder. You somebody baby's father, someone's lover, son of your mother, somebody brother, somebody nigga. Now your spirit in the air like a whisper, hearing your name mentioned when we pouring out some liquor. The days go by quicker and the nights don't seem to differ. It's getting cold, so I shivered and asked my soul to be delivered. The house that love built, that HUD renovated, that Section 8 pays for. Well, let's pray for him, let the beat play for him, put his struggles on display for him, cause he gotta go and face the drama with a different face from the one that he used to face his mama. If you look close, you will see it consists of a smile that hurts, an ice grill, and a trace of trauma. Little bit of his father, another criterion that's no different from a young Liberian who let the delirium weary him, living in the inner city out of his mind. Lyrian reconciliation. I'm cool, I don't foretell best. I ain't nice as MC, I ain't Cornell West, I am Cornell Westside, Chi-Town Rivera. Malcolm exercised the demons, gangster leaning, who traded in his kufi for a new era. Chose a 44 over a mortarboard. I ain't accredited institute graduate, I ain't from Nazareth, my conception wasn't immaculate. I ain't master no calculus, a good addition to the rap audience. I backflipped on the mattress they slept on me on. What down, Joe? Knowing is half the battle. Fighting temptation, have an apple. Shake the snakes, pimp the system. Let's get into it. Tab
And now you're listening to the Counterpower Radio Hour.
You're on WDBX, Southern Illinois Radio. Community radio for Southern Illinois. Felix,
yeah.
How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Not
Reunited
too bad,
at last.
So, what's going on with you, Margaret?
Oh, depressed. What's going on with you, Felix? Sense of,
to wallow in your
I don't know. I mean,
despondency.
My material conditions are changing, and with that, change the ideas that you make sense out of the world with.
Yeah, sure. People underestimate the importance of that. Changing the material conditions.
Marx really, not only at a structural level of society itself, but also at an individual psychological level. The importance of material conditions. I hope everybody knows what I mean. What I mean is like the way that I earn money is changing, or the way that I'm that I fend for myself changes. And so the idea, right, is that is that those ideas that you understand your life with have to be attuned to the material conditions. And as your material conditions change, your ideas about yourself and about the world have to change because you have different relevant features of reality that you're confronting. Whew. So, you went on a little trip.
I did over the weekend.
Yeah? You wanna share some information about that trip with us?
A little bit, yeah. I think it could make for some good discussion. So, I was in Chicago from Thursday through Sunday, and I was attending the Socialism 2015 conference.
Yuck.
Among other things. Yuck.
Socialism.
Well, so yeah, actually, that's a good question to start. What does that word mean to you, Margaret?
Oh God.
Because there's all different sorts of reasons why people might say yuck.
Yeah, it means like
there's reasons I might even say yuck.
Unkempt old men talking at you for hours and hours without stopping to listen, and like you know, people that have like, you know, all the answers and don't ask any questions except for ones that are already, you know, have pre-programmed answers. And what else does socialism mean? The USSR, so it means like gulags and death camps. I don't know if they're actually death camps, but gulags anyway. What else does it mean? Boringness, grayness.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do associate it with
Bernie Sanders.
Well, thank you for that rundown, that beautiful explanation.
Thank you. Did you want me to be serious?
Sure, yeah. So maybe just a little clarification.
Well, you be serious first, and then I'll be serious.
Okay, so, well, I mean, I'll talk very concretely with respect to the conference. So it was organized by the ISO, their National Socialist Organization.
Okay, so not old people, but young college students.
A lot of young persons, too. I mean, there were some of the older, what had you put it, unkept old men, unwilling to listen. Yeah, so there were probably some of those folks around, and there was in some instances a less than eagerness to listen to different revolutionary perspectives. One might put it like that, and we'll get into more detail on that a little bit later in the broadcast. But the idea, the undergirding revolutionary idea was that capitalism is incompatible with humanity, and that there is an impetus, a need to transform the world that we live in into something more socialistic, meaning there wouldn't continue to be the same private control of the productive property that's producing things and value and what have you, and that there wouldn't be the same market-based system for exchanging goods and services, what have you, and there wouldn't be the same capitalist labor relation where you have, like, again, one small group of people with a piece of paper that enables them to own the means for other people to produce things, and then another group of people, the mass of people, who then sell their labor to the people with the pieces of paper so that they can earn wages and try to survive. And so they want to eliminate that, socialists generally.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's a very broad definition of socialism. There's an even broader one. And that is like socialism as... And I was kind of surprised to learn this, that like when the word socialism first migrated into the United States, the contrast was not with capitalism, but with individualism, which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Social versus individual. And it was a question of, to use a fancy word, social ontology. It's the question of like, what is, what is the social world? Is it fundamentally comprised of individuals? Or is it or do you need to look at it as a collective whole, as a social grouping? And so... And the idea is that then capitalism becomes associated with a certain kind of individualism, and that is something that puts us in competition with one another, that treats us as individual economic units out to fend for ourselves, as they say, earn our own living or something like that. Whereas socialism would begin from an emphasis on the social construction of the individual. But Yeah, well, it's worth noting, right, in the long history of socialism, there are many, many kinds of riffs on just what it would mean to move beyond capitalism. And the major split of the 19th century is between the Marxists and the anarchists, or those that thought that the best way to achieve socialism was through the use of, in some senses, the seizing of state power in order to reorganize the economic life from while using the government or the state to do that. And that was the state socialist and the Marxist approach, and then the anarchist approach, which was saying no, like the problem is not merely capitalism, but the problem is the state itself, which is inherently hierarchical, and therefore inherently something that imposes from above onto others, imposes rules and dictates, and that we're never gonna like train ourselves to be free if we're still working within the state's confines. And so the anarchists were socialists.
Yes, I'm glad you said that.
And that's the important thing, right? Is that like and over the course of the 20th century, there became, and especially very recently, there's been a rift, like where the anarchists disidentify as socialists or feel themselves in conflict with socialists. But of course, like the roots of it is like who was it? Alexander Berkman saying any anarchist is first a socialist and then an anarchist. And anarchism is a particular vision of what socialist freedom looks like and how to get there. So,
and just to add on to that a little bit, and the different conceptions of what socialism might even mean now today. So somebody like Noam Chomsky says, for example, if socialism means anything, it's people in control of like the things they need in order to survive, producing the things they need in order to survive, and controlling that, rather than that being taken by somebody else and then realized as profit. And Richard Wolff, Marxian economist, has a different conception, which also differs from many of the people who attended the Socialism Conference, or at least the people who organized it. And so rather than the old model, which made quite a big deal, and I think maybe for some good reasons, differentiating market systems and the competition that entails in terms of like how we're producing things and distributing them, and juxtaposing that with the socialist model, which would be state control and ownership and distribution through a centralized apparatus. And so Wolff says, well, no, that's the wrong way to think about it. Let's actually think more somewhat along the Chomskyan lines. He doesn't say that, but that's essentially what he's arguing for, is that it should be the people who are producing value or producing a surplus in their workplaces that get to decide what happens to that collectively, and also decide how they organize themselves and how they're going about working in that workplace.
So you think there's like a convergence of contemporary like Marxist thought and historical thought that's been associated with the anarchist perspective?
I think that's possible, yeah.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting about the Socialism 2015 conference, and I think I told you this when I was giving you a ride back home last night, is that they attracted quite a few high-profile speakers, many people that I respect their work quite a bit. Journalists like Amy Goodman, Rania Kolick, Christian Parenti, scholar and journalist, and Aaron Dowdy Roy was there. Musician Boots Riley was there, and so I, like I said, I have a lot of respect for the things these people do, and I went in thinking they could never live up to my expectations.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, in each case, they far exceeded my expectations.
Wow.
Yeah, everybody blew me away. And part of the reason was, I mean, this was not the sole reason, but they added a hate to put it in such like pluralistic terms, but they added a diversity of viewpoints that otherwise would have been lacking, I think.
In each case, they did. So,
Yes.
So you didn't feel like they were just towing the ISO party line.
No, they weren't, and I'm sure the ISO, probably the organizers probably knew that they wouldn't, but that's okay. I mean, because they were also talking about things that were not necessarily incompatible with ISO's perspective.
Do you know? So the ISO is a Trotskyist organization.
From what I understand, yeah.
But so, do you know anything about like what their like strategy for the for the contemporary world is? And I don't expect our listeners to know that. I don't even know that.
Yeah,
You know?
So I've got some ideas.
Yeah.
Having been to 2 of these conferences and also talked to some folks, and so maybe I could talk about one of the panels, and I think that might give us a better idea. So they had a panel on, well, they had one on Syria, and I'll talk about that in a second, but they also had one on Venezuela. I forget the actual name, but it was like Venezuelan Revolution in Crisis, or Venezuelan Revolution ? Something crisis. And there were 2 speakers. They were both really good, but they both, and one was actually had spent quite a bit of time in Venezuela. She was I think born there, lived for a long time in there, lived in Spain for a while, and moved back, something like that. And so she had mentioned a lot of the writers who have also discussed what's called the Bolivarian Revolution, like John Bellamy Foster, who writes for Monthly Review, who wrote this piece not too long ago called Chavez and the Communal State, where he's talking about the influence that Istvan Meszaros, who wrote Beyond Capital, had on Chavez, and Chavez being the former leader of Venezuela, who inaugurated the Bolivarian Revolution after he was elected in 98 and 99. And he had adopted, after reading Meszaros, he adopted this idea that capitalism the social metabolic process of capitalism can't just be abolished, it has to be replaced.
So, I knew you were going to use that phrase, the social metabolic process of capitalism.
You knew I was going to use that?
Yeah, because that's the idea that this guy that Beyond Capital has. But so I wonder, talk about what does that mean? And what you're saying is there are strategic and political consequences to adopting that framework.
I think so.
Yeah. So what does it mean to say that capitalism is a social metabolism? Like, I don't know. I mean,
yeah, and so the way that I understand it, and this is something that I think maybe could have been discussed a little bit more in the panel, is the ways in which our human relationships with each other and with the world have to be dramatically changed in order for the system that those relations comprise to be different, and for then ourselves to be different. Thinking very dialectically. So sorry, that's a little complex, but...
Well, the basic idea of a social metabolism, as I would understand it, is that like to look at like how the society reproduces itself. You know, like in the same
social
way that metabolism,
yes.
and reproduces not just from one. I mean, it is from one generation to the next, but like you think about your body, right, and like the things that how your metabolism reproduces you for the next day, right. And so to think about capitalism as not just some static thing, but as something that is always reproducing itself.
Yes, exactly.
Because there are certain patterns of behavior that allow capitalism to continue. We recreate it, I mean, every day, every hour, but also every generation. And so the idea being that, well, let's analyze it as a metabolic process and ask not just how, I guess, you abolish or stop it, right? Because that, I mean, what would that mean? I mean, that just means killing the organism, but like how you actually intervene and create a different metabolic process to create the reproduction of some other form of relating. And
so with that insight in mind, Chavez and other revolutionists in Venezuela attempted to construct this system of communal councils, which they did discuss in the panel. And something else that wasn't discussed quite as much was the efforts at workers' control, something along the lines of what Richard Wolff might advocate, which and I think I mentioned this on a previous broadcast, and it's documented pretty well in a film by Dario Azzolini, who was also mentioned in the panel. There was this weird employer strike, like a Ayn Rand Atlas Shrugged scenario, where the employers are just like, oh, okay, well, we're just going to shut things
our
down.
creative
Yeah,
power.
and the workers are like, okay, and then they just kind of took it over and started running it themselves, like including the bus system.
What if that was like part of a strategy of encouraging an Ayn Rand like strike of those gifted, capitalist industrialists or something? Be like, yes, go find your own little island or something. We'll take it from here.
Yeah. and so one of the panelists in particular, and another one who had participated in one of several of the communal councils, had said that they had kind of faltered and had not been able to maintain the same level of vibrancy and potency that they once had, especially with regard to like enabling people to make the decisions that affect their own lives. And like, whether that's true or not, it's hard to say. I mean, like, I've heard differing accounts, and from what I gather, they still exist and they still meet regularly, although maybe not with the same volume, and I guess not with the same impact. And the workers' control has diminished in some respects, although from other accounts it's picked up in others. And so what was stressed, though, was that it wasn't a real revolution. This was said by like one of the panelists, and also like
wasn't a
real revolution.
Okay.
And so it got me thinking, well, what does revolution mean to all of you?
And what did they mean when they said that?
Yeah,
what were they distinguishing it from?
Because Chavez achieved power through parliamentary means. He was elected.
It's only a real revolution if it's a coup?
I guess so, which seems so bizarre. And then so like the question that I asked was, because one of the speakers had mentioned John Bellamy Foster, Masaros Azzolini, who also co-edited the book, The Workers' Control from the Workers' Control from the Commune to the Present, and there's a chapter in there on Venezuela and workers in control there. In control of production, and so I was wondering, like, if the communal councils and the efforts at like worker self-management were combined, and like if they coalesced into a more potent force, like if that would be more consonant with their view of what revolution would mean, and like no, the answer was no, essentially.
You asked that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I like they didn't say it as dismissively.
So now if this was a panel of anarchists and they said it wasn't a real revolution because there was still a state, Yeah.
And
I don't know if anarchists would really say that. They might say like, yeah, it's a revolution, it's just not the right one or something. But this guy was coming from a state socialist perspective.
Yeah. But here's the interesting thing:
Sure.
is the idea being that it's a revolution if there's like this armed struggle that seemed to be the implication, but also that the capitalist state would be dismantled and replaced with a worker state, was the vague idea that I got. But what I couldn't wrap my head around is like, how is this going to be enacted if you don't have like either like the institutions in place, or if you haven't changed that metabolic process, so people have actually practiced relating differently, doing things differently,
Sure.
producing differently.
And you didn't think that they like were critiquing that theoretical framework? They were just working with a particularly narrow conception of how revolution had to happen?
They had all sorts of brilliant critiques.
Okay.
But not of that one so much. Not of my basic point.
Yeah. So
there's
were these academics on the panel?
Some of them. I don't. Well, on the panel. Well, there were two people on the panel. One was an organizer, who I don't know if she's an academic or not, but certainly brilliant. And the other guy I think also was. And many of the members of the ISO are, but many are not. They're all like, for the most, I mean, generally speaking, extremely articulate. Have a really firm grasp of the history and development of global capitalism and the history of revolutionary struggle. Selective history.
Yeah.
I should add that.
Yeah.
But it's very detailed. And what I was really struggling with was this one, that the fetishization of this like magic moment where you capture the state and radically transform it And as if like that's going to solve all your problems. And like so the guy, one of the guys on the panel, is like, you know, he was critiquing prefigurative politics, which is not what I was talking about. I was talking about like enacting revolution there, like on a smaller scale, which is what I think was attempted. Maybe not, you know, strategically, not in the best ways, or they could have been improved. But he's like, I was a child of the '60s. You know, capitalists don't care if you go and grow your potatoes and your tomatoes out there in your own little garden plot, and you know, communalize that. They don't really care. Is like global capitalism is going to continue to run, and like in part, like I don't entirely disagree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a question of scale.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, because if, like, enough people start doing that, then they are going to care, but what they're going to do is try and intervene into that, right?
Yes.
They're going to try to create a kind of feudal situation where, you know, okay, they're owning the land, you're growing the potatoes on your land, they get a cut of it or something like that, and then that becomes then... I mean, for me, that becomes actually like a much more productive site of resistance than fighting for $15 an hour at Walmart or something.
Oh, well, I thought you say then like the trying to seize the state in a magic moment.
I mean, either way, but I'm saying like actually like people defending their own means of subsistence versus asking for more from corporations that are like still destroying the freaking world.
We're going to talk about that in a little bit, I think.
Okay.
But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, there was one other thing that I was going to say, but I forgot it, so it doesn't matter.
Okay.
So let's talk about that.
Well, momentarily.
Okay.
And so I wanted to add that one of the panelists who had this critique of prefigurative politics where you're trying to enact in the present, usually internally within your movement or organization, the types of social relations that you'd like to see on a broader scale. The types of social relations you might like to see replace capitalism, for example, would be like one way to think about prefigurative politics. And his critique seemed to conflate, trying on with this question of scale, trying to like on a very broad-based societal level to transform that metabolic process and those social relations and do things differently with some facilitation and also like because it's tension filled, also some repression in some cases from the state in Venezuela, for example, but trying to do that like to the extent that you're able, and then for me it seems that like you're already enacting that revolutionary praxis. And if it comes to the point where like you're in like serious after you've like developed the communal support for this like these different social systems or this different social system, then it would seem like an easy thing to overthrow the state. Like it would. I mean, there was a lot of
maybe
criticism.
not easy thing.
Well,
you're saying you'd be in a better position.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking like the most ideal scenario, and like I guess they're like, well, that's never going to happen. But I'm like, well, I don't think what you're proposing seems like it's ever going to happen. And so so actually, let me transition then.
Sure.
Into another panel that I attended on the Syrian revolution. But guess what they were talking about? They weren't talking about the revolution that we would...
They weren't talking about the Kurds.
No, they weren't talking about
that was the thing I was going to ask about, because Bookchin had been a Trotskyist.
Right. Yeah.
And so I imagine that Bookchin, who is one of the people that has been inspiring for the Kurdish revolution, which interestingly, the last show was talking a little bit about, I guess, but... That he would be a someone that they would really not like because they're very hardline Trotskyists.
I did mention Bookchin in one, not that panel because I didn't get a chance to speak in that one. And some of the folks were Skyping in. Again, a brilliant analysis, and in many ways certainly seemed quite accurate of recasting what's been construed as the civil war in Syria as like a genuine revolution, which is interesting. Like that's a revolution, but the actually like the changing of the social relations in Venezuela is not.
Okay, so tell me about what did they think about the Syrian revolution?
Yeah. I mean, and then so I mean, I think they're right that Assad is like could accurately be identified as like a brutal dictator in many ways, and they tried to downplay like say the repression or aggression outside of like the military conflict that the Free Syrian Army and the rebel forces would be responsible for, which may be more accurate than I realized because I just haven't studied it enough. But there was a flippant reference to Nojva, and there was somebody who asked a question about it, about the ongoing social revolution in Syria and Kurdistan.
Somebody wasn't you.
No, it wasn't me. But so like prior to the question, even one of the guys who was Skyping in had said, he was like, I support the Kurds and everything, what they're doing is like, but it's not. Some people think it's like la commune. He's like, I just don't see it like that or whatever. And so then they proceeded to critique, and then in response to the question too, proceeded to critique the PKK and their past and faulting them for their past ideology and the way that they acted in the past, like, which had no bearing or relevant. There was no discussion at all about like what's actually going on there.
Whoa.
Because I guess they dismissed it and didn't think it's important because it's not a revolution, because it doesn't fit their
Yeah.
Which, I mean, another thing about this conference too that I appreciated was that while it's organized by the ISO, they do encourage discussion and some debate, but then they also have like their people who are ready and waiting in the wings to like jump up and give like a 3-minute answer to a question that's going to set you straight. But there's also a lot of attendees who are not ISO members or even ISO affiliated, and maybe even don't know much about socialism.
Yeah,
is what I found out.
Like trying to figure. Oh man, yeah. How do you think it was as an introduction for those people? That were just like, oh, socialism. I wonder what that is. Like, it's in Chicago. Just go down.
Some of the panels, I think people thought were fantastic.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned before.
Aaron
Dottie Roy was amazing. Boots Riley, who I think we're going to talk about now.
All right. Well, wait.
Sorry.
Okay, yeah. Go on.
Okay. So, Boots Riley, the hip-hop artist who is the frontman for The Coup. He's also a member of Street Sweeper Social Club with Tom Morello. We had previously used The Coup's My Favorite Mutiny as our opening track for the Counterpower radio hour when it aired and continues to air under a different name, Saturday midnight to 2.
What's it called now?
The track name?
The
Counterpower
After Hours?
Yeah. Did you all use that last time?
No, we didn't.
Okay. Tune in, by the way. We might play some of The Coup Saturday night.
Yeah.
So, anyway, Boots was there at the conference and had, I guess, attended some panels, had coffee with Aaron Dottie Roy, had a couple selfies taken with Rania Kolick, who's a journalist who does reporting from the underclass, dispatches from the underclass, is the way that she frames it. And also,
did you try to get a little photo with Boots Riley?
I didn't try to get a photo. I did talk to him.
Yeah.
And had a book signed for a friend. And but before that, I didn't get to ask my question in the panel, which is unfortunate because I felt uncomfortable just asking him one-on-one. It was one of those questions like for everybody else. Although I did tell him that we play his stuff on the Counterpower Radio Hour, community radio for Southern Illinois, and we had a handshake that was like. We had a moment. We had a magic moment. Yeah.
All right.
So during the panel, though, he was the setup was that he was going to be interviewed by Dave Zarin, who is a sports reporter, writer for The Nation, and Dave Zarin sitting there on the table, cross-legged, next to Boots, who was standing, and was going to ask questions. But when they show up, Dave Zarin like, oh, it's unfortunate, Boots has a really sore throat. He's really hoarse, and like we're not sure if we're going to be able to do this. And he said it very earnestly, quite candidly, and everybody's like, "Oh!" And then Boots is like, "I can still do it." And then everybody's like, "Oh!" But then somebody runs, like, because there wasn't a mic set up or speakers, so somebody runs and gets a mic and speakers, and he's able to do it. So he fields questions from Dave Zarin, and he talks about. One, how he got started in organizing revolutionary struggle and hip-hop. When he was younger, he said, quote, I wanted to be Prince. So he wanted like some kind of stardom, and afterward he would look back and think, well, that was really that was really like super individualist of me and narcissistic, like reflecting the dominant culture, the aspects of the dominant culture that I really don't like. But then he realized, and I think this is a direct quote, we're told we're not anything, we're told the people on TV are something, and so he just wanted that like basic mutual recognition and dignity as a human being, to feel like his life mattered and felt like he was important.
And there's and so was he saying that like in the world that he grew up in, being famous was the only way to really feel like you could get that you could be treated like a human being or something.
That's how he thought initially.
Yeah.
But then he started organizing, and that's like when he felt like his life really mattered.
Huh.
So the first, the first example that he gave, like his first foray, introduction into the world of organizing, was when he had helped strategize for this walkout at his high school when he was like 14. And he said like this, if you need an easy target, school uniforms. It's a great thing to organize around. Like everybody loves it, and they had like this tremendous success. Like everybody walked out, and he's like, "Man, this is so easy." But then, like when they're out there, like the principal came out, and like Boots Riley had the bullhorn. 14-year-old Raymond Riley had the bullhorn, and he's like, "Riley, get over here." He's like, "Give me that bullhorn," and Boots is like, "Okay." So he's like giving it to him, but then he had underestimated the revolutionary mentality of his fellow classmates, who then like just piled on top of the principal and tried yanking the bullhorn away from him, and I guess like the principal was a former football player, was probably like 6'2" or 6'3", big guy, and he's just throwing these 14-year-old kids as he's waving side to side trying to get them off the bullhorn. And somebody had taken a picture, and it was on, I guess, the front page the next day, and the students were accused of assaulting the principal or whatever, and he had literally blood on his hands. And then so the teachers, and maybe something similar was said over the loudspeaker that no, and this is this is what Boots said, that like nobody should listen to Raymond Riley. He's a communist and wants to bring us back to the years of the Black Panther Party. But people's reaction to that was, well, and this is what as the way Boots put it, like we know that's something, I mean, communism the government doesn't like, so it's probably good. and people
said that over the loudspeaker.
Yeah. And people didn't know much at all, weirdly, about the Black Panthers, even in Oakland, and so that actually generated.
And this
some
must
interest.
have been what, the 70s or 80s?
Yeah, it was the late 80s, I think.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, which I mean, just shows you like how that history.
Somehow there was that. I want a name for that break that occurred that like lost all sense of history. I don't know what to call it.
Yeah.
The veil of ignorance. I don't know, but something happened between the 70s and the 80s where everyone in America forgot what had just happened, or there was this there's this crack in the historical memory, and that's apparently just as true in Oakland as it is in Carbondale, where it's a very pronounced break in the historical memory. And I mean, I'm sure like there are people that were alive from like across that gap, and so I think it's also as much not so much a matter of forgetting as a matter of like selective storytelling or something.
Yeah.
Right, like there's a selective narrative that like older people have chosen to pass down, and for whatever reason, maybe because they thought it was dangerous or whatever, like they've chosen not to hand down with the same significance the stories of resistance and rebellion, or only to hand down kind of cartoonish images of them. So anyway.
And yeah,
we're working on undoing that, folks. If anybody has any stories, come down to the Flyover Info Shop and share them with us.
Definitely.
214 North Washington Avenue Street.
Avenue Street. Yeah. Check out our website, flyoverinfoshop.org. There's a new post.
And that's a serious invitation.
Yeah, for sure.
We actually want to like be developing an story archive of like resistance in Southern Illinois. So if you have any like old pamphlets, old flyers, or just tales you want to share, come down and talk to us.
We have moderate tech recording equipment that could be used, I suppose, if you're interested in documenting your narrative.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk a little bit more about like Boots' story, actually, because I think it's really fascinating. And so after his like 14-year-old introduction to resistance, he got involved with like several different organizations, and many of those that I had never heard of. He was critical of one because they were propounding these revolutionary doctrines, but people in like their own town had never heard of them, like even though they were doing some cool things or whatever. But anyway, he also started like through one of those organizations organizing farm workers. He was always up at 4 a.m. trying to do that, which was really a trial by fire learning scenario. Because he had never done anything like that before, had no idea how. I from what I gathered, the people who was trying to organize, not all of them spoke English, so it was just like, oh, well, just trying to throw it together extemporaneously. And one of the takeaways learned from like doing that, and then also stuff, and I'm going to talk about Occupy Oakland in a second, that it's important to organize around being clear about revolutionary goals while ensuring like the little victories to improve people's lives, which I think is like a generally a good rule of thumb, and then organizing around things and actually accomplishing things to get people excited. So not just improving people's lives, but also stuff that gets people excited. And so he said like in some of the stuff that he was doing that actually it did seem to inspire people, that it wasn't just doing like the same old stuff. And so one of the things he'd said, which I thought was interesting, I want to get your comment on, and he thought that the whole debate about the reform-revolution divide, which of course can be traced back like to Rosa Luxemburg and before, but he thought that like focusing on that was largely a product of the New Left. Do you think there is any...
I don't know about that as a history of that idea, but so tell us about what he said about it.
He didn't really elaborate, and that's why I was kind of curious, and of course didn't get a chance to really ask a question, and I wasn't gonna ask him that one when I spoke to him one-on-one. So I don't know what he meant by it.
I could probably speculate, but I won't.
And so another thing that he had said, and I'll get back to the organizational stuff in a second, but so and Dave Zirin had asked him a question. He's one of the only artists, celebrities, to have WikiLeaks revelations say something about him. So he's been systematically surveilled.
Zirin or Boots?
No, but Dave Zirin asked Boots about this, and yeah. And he had said that, and I want to get your take on this too, that we can't really have a clandestine movement anymore. And in what he said was what they're going to find out is hopefully what a whole bunch of people already know.
What
the state surveillance apparatus.
So he's saying there can't be a clandestine movement because surveillance has so penetrated our lives? Is that right?
Yeah.
Maybe. Certainly seems that way.
No, I don't know if that then implies that there can't be secret actions that are planned or anything like that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm not clear what the meaning is. The only thing they're going to find out is what a bunch of people already know.
Oh, so like if the state's doing this systematic surveillance and they're like trying to uncover the secrets about you, like the idea is that like you're the movement that you're building or whatever, like these like this type of resistance should be so widespread that everybody already knows it anyway, so like nobody cares what like you're going to.
Oh yeah. So
or that you don't have the power
call
to.
You a revolutionary or an anarchist, everyone's like, yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right, and like I think that there's probably like different people engage in those kinds of things differently. Like obviously, like some people are really public about their politics, even if those are revolutionary politics, which has certain risks and also has certain like maybe advantages. Maybe you make those politics like more of a common currency. And so then, if there is state repression or something, people will stick up for you a little more, maybe. But other people like really try and stay as far outside of the system as they can, and there's probably different kinds of effectiveness for each of those things.
And so I wanted to talk too before I transitioned to the Occupy Oakland stuff, and one of the most I think like pressing questions that maybe he raised So he got into hip hop, from what I gathered, probably when he was in high school at some point, and was like involved in some of these organizations. And he would invite his friend Johnny over, Johnny who could rap, to rap about police brutality and that sort of thing. But then Johnny would be like, "I would only do it on the condition if you're going to be my hype man." And so, and so Boots said that he had to act like he could rap, and then he started acting like he could do it. And he'd never liked musicians because his mother had dated musicians throughout his childhood, and even like he was also close with his dad. But I can talk about that later. But his mother dated musicians, and he's like, man, these dudes are not grown, like just did not care for them at all. But he got really into it and realized that he was not naturally gifted. I mean, one of the things he said, he started rapping because he also couldn't sing, so wasn't going to be able to be Prince. But he, undertook this disciplined study, sort of using in sort of a knowledge transference sort of thing, where like the stuff that he learned while he was organizing and involved in some of those movements and organizations, like that type of discipline like carried over, and he is a very, like, I think he even called it like insights from dialectical materialism. So it's not like these, like you have these like natural gifted enlightened people who are so much better than everybody else. It's like particular conditions that shape and mold them, that they like interact with and within. And so he just focused really hard and tried to listen to what other people said, like if they liked this or didn't like that, thought that was crap, and that enabled him to actually kind of get a foot in the game.
Whoa.
But then by 24, after he'd already had a really successful album, and used up like a lot of the money and like trying to like fund some of these different like forms of resistance that he was trying to support, he had a midlife crisis of sorts, and he felt like he was wasting his life. Is the way that he put it. And he actually started working as a telemarketer because the money kind of dried up. And it's like,
so he went into that lucrative field of telemarketing.
Yeah, I mean that was all he could get, I guess. And I mean, and he's still doing like other things on the side. And maybe I think he also like immersed himself like more in like what it would mean. Well, he immersed himself like first in some more of that organizing, and realized then that like it being involved with some of the organizations who like he disagreed with in certain respects, that if they were just going to be like distributing flyers, he could probably propagate that message much more broadly through his music.
Yeah.
But one of the things he did learn, and this was also underscored, I guess, by his participation in Occupy Oakland, was the importance of organizing around class lines in the black community. And so one of the things that he said was like about police in particular.
So explain what that means to organize around
sure.
class lines in the black community, and what was he distinguishing that from?
So I don't know what the point of distinction necessarily was, but the emphasis would be on organizing around like working class issues, like the way that you're oppressed because you work for a wage and it's not a very good wage.
Is it? My suspicion was that he was distinguishing that from organizing around simply blackness, or like organizing around identity lines as black, and the advantage to organizing around class lines in the black community,
or other social justice issues. Yeah,
but that would bring out the fact that, like, just like every other community, like the black community is not homogenous, right? There's different power relations within that community, just like within any. And so, and that in simply organizing around the racial identity, it can obscure those other lines of oppression.
And so he had a particularly, I think, an instructive quote about the police, and I wanted to get your take on it too. So he had said that it's often not only in regards to their, meaning people in the black community, their one-on-one relationship with the cops. It's that like the police would be stopping them because like they'd be trying to hustle or something because they couldn't make a living wage doing anything else. And so like economically they're being oppressed, and in trying to compensate for that oppression or to like transcend the bounds that are imposed as a result of that impression, like then they're hassled, like in mass, by officers, and like that's when like they really get the most friction, and so like it's quite clear then, like when you break it down for folks like that, when like capitalism needs unemployment, unemployed people need to eat, and they're met with violence and physical force, when they try to make sure they eat by other means that are deemed illegal by the state, then like that actually makes sense to people because that's their lived experience. Does that seem right to you?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
It's almost as if the police are there to enforce the rule of private property.
Yeah, and that's another thing that he said too. Yeah, that like legal business needs violence.
Yeah.
And illegal business has to regulate. They have to regulate themselves.
Yeah.
And they in turn incur violence from the legal authorities.
Sure.
In the process of trying to regulate themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but legal business needs violence that looks like peace.
Yeah.
Right. That is, it needs a violence so total and absolute that anything that nothing is allowed to even disturb it or make it even look as if it is not a social agreement, which is, part of how capitalism functions, right? The smooth flow of daily life appears as if it is a mere social agreement. We all just choose things to be this way. But anybody that decides to choose otherwise is subject to arrest.
And so one of the things that he did say, which might be a point of departure for the two of you, was that like it's important to like raise wages and the jobs that people have now.
Oh, okay. This is getting back to that other thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like I'm not going to tell people that they shouldn't struggle for better working conditions, but I do think that like the wage, it's like I don't see a like a path out of that, right? Like I mean, at best you end up with like the situations of many of the like industrial unions where you got $40 an hour to be a pipe fitter, great, but that all that does is make you like even more like bought into, it just neutralizes the your force as a social contradiction within capitalism. It buys you off basically, and it doesn't actually challenge and threaten the functionings of that system. And so, I mean, and I think that system is fundamentally like there's always going to be some people that are excluded from that. But it's also always going to be easier to buy off one group than grant generalized demands to everybody. And yeah, I think it's the wage is fundamentally problematic as a mode of like organizing human labor, which I don't know if we have time to really get into that right now.
I don't think so either. But I think Boots would agree with you too.
Yeah, and so I mean to try and say it very briefly, I'm working on a way to turn this argument into something very brief. It's like what does money do? Money directs our labor, or money commands our labor into things that maybe we wouldn't otherwise do, but we do because we need a wage in order to create the conditions of happiness for ourselves and those we love. And so we end up doing things that can be environmentally destructive, can be structurally harmful for other people, but we learn how to ignore those consequences of that action because we need to trade ourselves in exchange for the wage. And there's something fundamentally problematic about that. It ends up putting us in these situations, like for example, people who are frackers are in, or anybody that's engaged in, a really intense environmentally destructive industry, where it's like, I could look at the research, I could think about that. Sometimes they do, but I gotta feed my kids, and getting them higher wages isn't going to stop that situation, right? The only thing that's going to stop that situation is creating the ability to sustain ourselves outside of that system that relies upon the destruction of the earth.
Yeah. So one of the odd things, and I want to get back to Boots to wrap up the show, but one of the odd things about some of the panels and the frameworks that were espoused in the Socialism Conference is like there was a really detailed history of the labor movement and understanding of its importance, and talks about solidarity with it. Like the Chicago Teachers Union had been major participants in the Socialism conference before, and like they'd had like several panels, and like they were still topics of discussion. Like I think they were still standing with the Chicago Teachers Union T-shirts there, and yet like then when something like with what was taking place in Venezuela, for example, with workers actually taking control of those means of production, like that seems to be like there was a disconnect between like showing solidarity and actually trying to empower people, but when they actually take it about empowering themselves and taking their affairs in their own hands, then it seems like there's a misunderstanding that like solidarity should be continuous. But anyway, we'll put that aside for the time being. I wanted to end with this bit about Occupy Oakland. And one of the things that Boots said was that that was a movement where there were the most black folks of any movement that he'd ever been in. And previously, as he understood it, folks would just ask, what's this doing? What's this really doing? Like, what's this going to accomplish? But with that, like, they could see the results immediately. And in both in terms of, one, like finally having a chance to feel like what you had to say mattered, and that had some impact, and it was being genuinely considered rather than ignored, as it is under the current political economic system. But then also in terms of like what they were able to accomplish, of course, Occupy Oakland helped organize that general strike. It's small in scale and not wholly as successful as maybe some would have liked, but also that like the strategy for it was abundantly clear to people. Like, if we quit working, this stuff's not going to continue to run. And yeah, one of the questions that I never got to ask, and this is the one that I was going to ask in front of folks, because I thought it would have been possibly generated some good discussion, was, having participated in Occupy Oakland and experienced that, and been exposed to some of those direct democratic practices, what some might term anarchist principles, if he thought that like that would be an essential part of any strategy of empowerment for that organizing around class lines in the black community.
You should email him.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Well, we're about up. Thank you so much for this report back from your experience. It sounded like you had a great time up there. Yeah, I wish we could play more of Boots' songs on the radio.
I think I've got one that is radio friendly. So
right now?
Willing with that. Yeah.
Well, we've only got 30 seconds.
Well,
we've got another person
well,
coming.
it's good to end with a song, so then the person can have some time to get situated.
Sure.
So it'll be the Coup Strange Arithmetic. And just one final plug for Boots' book that I picked up at the conference. It is titled "Tell Homeland Security We Are the Bomb."
Taught me some strange arithmetic, using swords, prison bars, and pistol grips. English is the art of bombing towns, while assuring that you really only bless the ground. Science is the honor book, beautiful study where you contort the